First of all, well, let me just briefly give you a little bit of history so you kind of know where baptism comes from because Christians didn't invent it. They like to claim there's a thing called Christian privilege, and sometimes Christians, particularly in our nation, think they invented everything, and that's just not true. By and large, most of the Christianity we know today came from Judaism. It's birthed out of Judaism, like they're our ancestors. So let me talk about that for a second, and then just let me. I want to give you one text because I want to give you one angle that might help as we talk about baptism, and then one question that I need to ask is: are we still going to do it in our space as progressives, as an ever-evolving spiritual collective, as we transcend? Is this something we include? The table's still here, but should baptism come with us? What does that look like? So let me do this. Let me read. Can I read Matthew to you? This is just a very short passage. This is Matthew chapter 3. I'll pick up in verse 13. When you talk about baptism, who's the most famous person you know in the Bible that baptizes? What's his name? John. Yes. Okay. So this is John the Baptist. And just so you know, John the Baptist was a revolutionary prophet. All right. So think about the Old Testament writers. You know how they had all those prophets? John the Baptist was in line with that. He was very much so into Judaism. That was his religion. He was a prophet like many of the Old Testament prophets. And he was a wild one. He wore clothing made of camel's hair. He ate locusts, wild honey. He called people to repentance, which is a word that's been hijacked in our culture, but it's actually a beautiful idea. It's just the changing of your mind, all right? So this is a little bit about John the Baptist and Jesus. This is Matthew 3, verse 13. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered him, let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness, or this is my right next step. Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw God's Spirit descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from the heavens said, this is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. God, what a beautiful story. What a beautiful line. All right, real quick, can we talk about the history for just a minute? Christianity didn't invent baptism. In fact, most world religions use and see water as an archetype of purification. Most of you probably know that. Water itself has become this great symbol in world religions. Where Christianity kind of got their idea of baptism from ultimately is Judaism. And Judaism had what they called a purity ritual washing, all right? They called this Tevilah. Tevilah, all right? Tevilah means kind of like full body. So you would go into the water full body, and they would go into these bodies of water, and there was actually a little bit of an evolution of this. So it used to be like a river, sometimes it would be a river, a lake, a spring, some kind of naturally fed gathering of water. But over time, as technology advanced, they created these special pools. And these pools were called mikvah, all right? Mikvah were pools that were created just for this like ceremonial ritual cleansing. And mikvahs would sit outside the temple, actually. They had mikvahs outside the temple because you would go into the mikvah before you could go into the temple because you had to be ritually cleansed, all right? So when I talk about the history of baptism for a minute, when we talk about the mikvah and purity ritual washings, I think we're talking about more so like spiritual ritual washing and less about actual bathing and cleansing. Although I will say, I think that was a part of it. When you look back in the Old Testament and you see things like Leviticus, you see things like Exodus, and you see all these laws, I want to show you one that'll give you an example of why they would even have like purity ritual washing. So this is Leviticus 14, verse 2, okay? So Leviticus 14, verse 2 would say this. This shall be the rule for the person with a defiling skin disease at the time of his cleansing, all right? So think in the ancient world, if you got leprosy and you had a skin disease, what they would do is they would basically practice long before COVID. Think about COVID for a minute. What happened in COVID? When people got infected, what did they do? We distanced ourselves from those people, right? So I know we can look back at some of this and we can think that's so ancient and barbaric. Why would they just kick someone out of the tribe? Well, they were doing it because they didn't have the medication that we have. So the only way to keep everyone from getting what you had is they had to kind of confine that person, all right? So they would practice long before COVID, social distancing. It's not a new thing, all right? They would basically say if someone showed up with leprosy, it's like we only have a small group of people in this tribe of ours, so we've got to like make sure that doesn't spread. So they would just kind of push these people outside of the camp. And then they would say over time, this individual who was pushed out shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. So what they would do is they would go into the mikvah, and they would cleanse themselves. Now, part of that in Leviticus is actual bathing, cleansing. Also, part of that was your standing before God, like actual purity, spirituality, like cleansing the soul from any defilement. So that's kind of a little bit of the idea of where it comes from. Now, in Judaism, there were many reasons why you would have to go into the mikvah. All right, let me just give you a couple of those. As preparation for marriage, you would go into the mikvah. You would cleanse yourself, okay? Purity, ritual washing. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, before you would participate in any religious activity like that, you're not going to come in before God and be defiled. You need like a purity ritual cleansing, so that was kind of another thing. Menstruation, that's all I'm going to say. But basically, you would be kind of exiled from the community during that time, and you would need to be like purity, like spiritually, like a ritual of washing, be made clean. Before you came into the temple, before you would walk into the sacred temple, you needed to go into the mikvah. If you had contact with a dead person, that's contamination. You would need to go into the mikvah. If you had contact with an impure person, so think about that. So this isn't much different than COVID. COVID has helped me understand these ideas a little better. If I were to say to you, you remember people used to say this, I don't have COVID, but I think I was exposed to it. They'd be like, all right, push you to the side. You would need to stay out there for a certain amount of time and then go through the mikvah. It was also a requirement to convert to Judaism. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that. And I went to Emory and still didn't know that. That was shocking. They failed me, all right? It's a requirement to convert to Judaism. So to come to Judaism, you had to do several things. Circumcision was one, but then also immersion was the other. I thought that was really interesting. And part of the reason they did that is because women couldn't be circumcised. So like, so how do we know if a female can get in or is in the family of God or not in the family of God? And they would say, oh, well, instead of circumcision, they can just go through the mikvah, all right? So the idea was to get back into community, you had to be cleansed. Now, I think this is interesting. Let me just pause here and say this. This is why Jesus was so disruptive. Because think about what Jesus did. Jesus shows up in the first century, and he really confuses the religious establishment of the day. Because what does he do? He walks up to those who have leprosy, and he touches them. Think about that. Think about that. Do you know how backwards and how heretical of an idea, how dangerous of an idea that would be? It's like Jesus disturbs all the categories of who's in and who's out. We've talked about this. You have all the outsiders that are defiled and unclean. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't say, yes, stay out there and then come through the mikvah. Jesus walks up to him and he's like, come on, I got you. Jesus also at one point is sitting by a well in John 4. And he's talking to a woman. And what does he say to this woman? I think this is really interesting. It takes on all new meaning. Jesus says, I am the living water. Drink of me and you'll never thirst again. It's an interesting idea that Jesus come and he revolutionizes the idea of the mikvah. It's like he's saying, you're looking for running water to be made cleansed and cleaned. And I want you to know, like, I am living water. As you begin to evolve, you move from kind of the mikvah and ancient Judaism. Around the first century, you start to see a shift in the understanding of the mikvah. Even in the book of Acts, if you read it, one of the earliest baptisms reported in the book of Acts, the first baptism reported in the book of Acts, first Gentile baptism recorded in the book of Acts, as we understand, we believe it's Gentile, is Philip on a chariot with an Ethiopian eunuch. Have you heard this story? And basically, he runs up to this eunuch and he's like, I overheard you reading some scripture. I want to interpret it to you. Interprets it. The man is just like, oh my God, has an awakening. And then he's like, will you baptize me? And Philip knows all the rules. Good Jew. Like, well, there's stipulations when you talk about what do you mean by baptism. But instead, he doesn't ask questions. He just goes down and takes me down there and baptizes. And you need to know something. I think that's so profound because if you don't know anything about an Ethiopian eunuch and what a eunuch is, I can just tell you this. The first, quote, Gentile conversion to the movement of Jesus was a sexual minority. And yet, isn't it interesting how far we have evolved to where there are literal churches not far from here who have denied people baptism because of their sexuality? And yet it doesn't take much to go back to the first century and realize, how did we get to where we are from where this thing started? And that was a part of the problem in the first century, going, who are we going to let into this thing? And what are the requirements? Fast forward, it starts getting real messy as you look through history. And I'm not saying there was some golden age where it was perfect. No, don't hear me say that. I'm not a proponent to say we all need to get back to the first century church. No, I've read 1 Corinthians. It was a disaster, all right? But I am saying there's something about how interesting it is that as we evolve and progress, we have seen to make these beautiful rituals that I think have incredible power and can be so transformative in a million ways that I want to talk about. But how is it that we've taken them and we've made them statements of identity, and they've become nothing other than other ways for us to divide ourselves? So now we have the baptized and the unbaptized, those who are in and those who are out. Now we have those who are clean and those who are unclean, right? And we start making value statements of people based on something that I am convinced that if Jesus was here, he'd be like, what is going on? I am convinced if Jesus here, it's like, what is this thing called Christianity? What did you do? I was not one time did Jesus ever show up like, people, call it Christianity, we're starting a new religion. No, Jesus was a Jew. He loved Judaism. He was a rabbi. He just progressed and he evolved and he grew. And he's like, oh, when this thing's done right, it actually points you where you need to go. Oh, that's great. So it's like training wheels. This is wonderful. And then a whole bunch of people came along and they're like, that's our guy right there. Let's just form a new religion since we're done with Judaism, and let's call it Christianity. I think Jesus would be like, I did not come for you to start a new religion. The whole point is that you and I could actually do something together and be catapulted outside of this religion of who's in and who's out. I came to just destroy all the categories of who's in and who's out. By the time you fast forward to the 3rd century, baptism becomes less about, like, from 1st century to 3rd century, I think you start seeing shifts. I think you see a shift from John to Jesus. John was very much so in Judaism and mikvah. But by the time you get to the 3rd century, there are loads of questions, first of all, about how you baptize. Is it water? Is it this? Is it that? But then here's another big one. Who is baptizing you? That became a big deal. Maybe that was a big deal for you. I know churches that are like, not just anyone can baptize you. I've been in places not just anyone can take part of the Eucharist, and not just anyone can do it. Like, you have to have someone who's qualified or a certified minister to serve you the Eucharist, right? Or you have to have an actual, like, ordained minister to baptize you. Otherwise, what? It doesn't count? Isn't it interesting how all these categories and all these things kind of got involved in it? And somewhere in the midst of it, I'm going, so here's my question. Is there still something beautiful about it, or has it gotten so toxic and so tainted that we just need to let it go? God, I asked that question about a lot of things. How about you? For the longest time, it was the table for me. I'm like, do we want to hang on to it? Because, God, it carries a lot of weight for a lot of people. And then I had an experience, and I realized how beautiful it could be, and I was like, oh, but what if we hung on to it and we attempted to reclaim it? And what if in a way to reclaim it, we started seeing it different? And what if we started telling people you could see it this way? And then other people started going, well, I see it this way. I'm like, oh, that's a fresh way to see it. And here's the thing. We kept it because it became this meaningful ritual for us. It's beautiful. But I can tell you this. You put the average evangelical in here and we come to that table together, they see it a lot different than how I see it. And so by the time you get to the 3rd century, oh my goodness, you have, it became a huge ordeal to get baptized. Not just anyone could get baptized. There was a lengthy period of instruction. You had to have rigorous moral examination for 3 years. So if you came to me and you're like, I want to be baptized. All right, we'll start the clock. We need about 3 years to examine your social networks, social media. We need to see what you're posting, how you're posting, see if you're in or out. We need to watch everything about you, all right? So imagine they went through a stint. Now, they pulled it back at some point, but they went through in the 3rd century, like roughly examination for 3 years. If you were, here's just a few people that were rejected baptism when they requested it. If you were a brothel keeper, you were rejected. If you were an actor, Greek theater, rejected. If you were a charioteer, I mean, some of you charioteers in here, people, you're not getting baptized. If you were a gladiator, you were not allowed to be baptized. If you were an official who put on public games, you were not. If you were a, quote, pagan priest, you were denied baptism. Oh, here's one. If you were a military officer in the Roman Empire, you were denied baptism. Boy, we've come a long ways. Wow. If you were a magistrate who had to cease from these professions, or you were rejected baptism. And they did at some point allow soldiers to be baptized, but they can only be baptized is if they were in the military, they did not swear the military oath, which in America, you can't be a soldier without swearing the military oath. So you see what I'm saying? If you were a sculptor or a painter, you could... There were a long time they were like, we don't think you can be baptized yet. But then they're like, we'll let you be baptized as long as you're not sculpting like idols and false gods. Yeah. Somehow this beautiful thing became a way to gatekeep, to decide who's getting it and who's not getting it. Now, let me just give you one meaning here that I think will be really helpful, okay? Real fast. I think this is so amazing. To our knowledge, Jesus never baptized anyone. Now, I think that's interesting. That is interesting. Jesus, nowhere that I'm aware of in the scriptures did Jesus baptize someone. But it is interesting that he chose to be baptized. Jesus comes on the scene, and before he starts, in the Gospels, you'll read the story, before he begins his ministry, scholars say he's roughly around 30 years old at this point. At 30, he decides he's going to get baptized. And where does he go get baptized? Now, this is where it gets interesting, and I think this would be worth your trip. He doesn't go to the mikvah, which is where everyone goes to get baptized. Right in front of the temple? No. Where does Jesus go? Mableton. All right? Hang with me. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? Like he does not go to the temple. This guy shows up and he's like, I'll tell you who I like, all right? Because there were rabbis in the day, and you would follow in the dust of the rabbi's sandals. You would follow that rabbi so close, depending on who it was, and they were like, that rabbi, that's our rabbi. He's speaking some truth. And Jesus decides he's going to go get baptized with a particular rabbi prophet named John. And where is John baptizing? Not at the mikvahs. John is not baptizing by the temple. John is way outside of the religious industrial complex, baptizing, check it out, in the Jordan River. In the Jordan River. Now, there are, oh my gosh, many, many meanings given to the image of baptism. I can't even begin to tell you, even in the scriptures, you can find different people looking at baptism like, oh, it looks like, for an example, Paul says, all it is a symbol of what happened with Christ, death, burial, resurrection. So Paul says you die and then you're reborn. There are 1,000 ways to talk about what this image looks like, what this symbol looks like. But I think these writers give us one with Jesus and John that, to me, it still resonates. It still moves me a little bit. All right, so let me give you this, okay? Jesus is baptized by John in the Jordan. Now, when it says in the Jordan, I just need to hang with me because there is an image. We're giving a geographical image. I also think it has deep political implications and theological implications, okay? It's almost like these writers are giving us a wink and a nod going, yes, John the Baptist, you know him. He's the wild one. He is the one that set up shop in the wilderness. And when we say the wilderness, we mean this. He's not co-opted by a power or a regime or an institution or a system. John has broke rank with the gatekeepers and decided He's going to do his work out in the wilderness away from the control of the institution. He went outside the religious authorities. And it's here that Jesus decides, I'm going that direction. That's where I want to get baptized. And he does. And something interesting happens. He apparently goes into the Jordan. John takes him under. He comes back up. And, my God, first of all, these images are loaded. It says that a spirit descends on the water like a dove. First of all, first century folks would have heard that and been like, I know exactly what that is. Genesis 1. Genesis 1, there was like the water like was formless, and the Spirit descended on this water, and they would immediately started making parallels, and it's almost as if the writer is playing with that image going, yep, a new creation is being born. And then the moment it happens, like Jesus raised up, and it says a voice from the heavens speaks and says, this is my Son, my beloved, in whom I am well pleased. Hang with me. It's almost as if Jesus is telling us something. These writers are telling us something. Jesus didn't seek approval, validation, or affirmation from the official institution. Jesus receives his validation not from Rome or Judaism or the rabbis, but Jesus receives his validation from the divine. Now, I am convinced lots and lots of people spend their entire lives seeking this very affirmation that Jesus is given in this moment. We seek it from every person we meet until at some point we hear it for ourselves. And this is what Vinings Lake is about, in my opinion. Questions of legitimacy, questions of worth, questions of value and identity are sought after all the time. You can see it everywhere you go. People just want to be valued. They want to know they're legitimate. They want to know their worth. They want approval. They want validation. And is this not the drive of the human species, to want someone to approve them, to validate them, someone to literally say, hey, I see you, you're good. And we search for it everywhere, don't we? And I don't know that it even goes away when you get older. I'm starting to believe it actually gets worse. I can't begin to tell you how many kids I see who are just longing from the approval from their fathers and mothers. And what's really wild is Katie and I see it a lot now too. Even when they become adults, I'm talking 45-year-old humans that never got the approval, the validation from their parents, and they're still working for it, still longing for it. I can't tell you how many people I know that are in relationships that are so incredibly toxic, but the only reason they're still in there is because that relationship somehow, it's like that's where they're looking to get their validation. And all I want to do is just say, wait, what are you doing? The world is yet to see the consequences of social media. I don't want to be like one of those pastors that are like, oh, social media is going to destroy us, all right? I think it's what you make it, but I will say this. I think we are now slowly starting to see that there is an underside to the internet. And a part of that is the toll it's taking on our 14 and 15-year-old girls. And it doesn't take long for me. I'm just being honest, non-judgmental, hear me. But red flag, red flag, red flag when I see my friends and they're posting things and I can just see it like, give me attention. Heart this thing. I need you to like it. And aren't you grateful? Hear me. I am so grateful I did not grow up with Instagram. I don't know that I would be here today. I mean, I could not imagine being a 14, 15-year-old kid going, well, only 3 of my friends liked it. Because I'm a grown adult now, and I still am like, well, look at that person gave a thumbs down. Well, we're done. You know what I'm talking about? Like, that easy, huh? That easy. I'm just saying there's a innate desire with all of us that I don't know what it is, but it's within us. Actually, I think I do know what it is, but we long, we crave someone validate me, and we look for it in all the places that we can't seem to find it. And I think Jesus shows us something monumental here. Jesus hasn't done anything yet. You know that, right? He hasn't started his ministry. He's done nothing yet. No sermons, no healings, hasn't healed anybody yet, no crowds. He's done nothing impressive. But the divine is pleased with him without him having to do anything to achieve it. Do you hear that? Jesus has done nothing yet to earn the love and the approval of the divine, yet the divine gives it before he ever does one miracle. And this is the starting point of the ministry of Jesus. It's the starting point of the work of Jesus. This is, in my opinion, the gospel. It's the one and important eternal truth that I try to share every time we gather. My job is to resound and repeat this eternal message for the remainder of my life to everyone I come in contact with, and that is this: you are a beloved child of God in whom God is well pleased, even though you haven't done a thing. This is grace. This is the good news. This is all I've been trying to tell you in this series. And when I say all of it, I mean I can't give you better news than that. You can't earn your way to it. I don't care if you've been baptized 12 times. You can't pray your way to it. You can't say a sinner's prayer 1,000 times, because I did it 1,020. And I'm telling you, it will not get you there. The message of the gospel is what Jesus has been showing us all along, and that is you are inherently united with God. You are inherently one with the divine. You always have been. You always will be. And there are no religions or gatekeepers that can tell you who's in and who's out, because newsflash, we're all in. All of us. We're all in. Well, how about we read a quote from Rohr, and then I'll ask this question, what it means for us. Rohr said this. He said, until we know we're a beloved son or beloved daughter or even just beloved, we don't have anything to say. We're so filled with self-doubt. My God, that 15-year-old, isn't it true? Self-doubt. God, anybody grow up with insecurity? Anybody still have insecurity? Man, I grew up with it. Katie and I were talking this week. We were gone, did a little vacay, and man, I got to talk about cleansing. Bro, I went into the ocean. I baptized myself 12 times. Man, there's something therapeutic about salt water for me. It's home for me. I get in it, I just float. It's like no one bothered me. A guy got real close, wave came, knocked me into him. His leg hit me, and I just got up, and I was like, there's a whole ocean. And you want to swim right beside this introvert? That's what we're going to do? You're going to swim right beside it. And then I realized, I don't know, there's something about humanity. The human species comes together. And in a lot of ways, sometimes I'll do it because, like, if there is a shark attack, if I'm close to other humans, maybe it won't be me. All right, so. We're so filled with self-doubt that we have no good news for the world. In his baptism, the Son of God had to hear it with his own ears, and then he couldn't be stopped. I love that. Then he has plenty to say for the next 3 years because he has finally found his own soul, his own identity, and his own life's purpose. I love that phrase. He had to hear it with his own ears. I need you to understand this. You can spend the rest of your life trying to get validation and approval from that mom and that dad, and you may never get it. You can try to get it from that spouse or that partner or that boyfriend or that girlfriend. Seek validation. I spent years of my life trying to be approved. If that person just knew about me, then I'm in. If I can just get endorsed by that person, if that person could give me a deal, then I'm in. And you're longing for this validation. And if I just had their eyes, and if I just had that platform, and I need this person to acknowledge me, and this person to approve me. And I'm telling you, it's a never-ending game. But life change, I'm talking life life-altering transformation when you realize, when you have an experience, your own, not living off someone else's, but you have an experience where the divine voice speaks to you and says, I need you to know something. This has always been true, but you are my beloved son, daughter, child, and I am well pleased with you. And when you experience that type of validation, well, then the work begins. Because you're no longer longing for the approval or affirmation from others. And I want you to know you don't need anyone's approval. You don't need anyone's affirmation. You don't need anyone's stamp in this room. But God, our culture screams that we do. When I started this church, I remember being forced to go to lunch with a gatekeeper. And he apparently was the gatekeeper that ran all the churches in our area. I didn't know that was a thing because I thought we were non-denominational, which means there are no gatekeepers. But turns out they were like, well, if you have a church with a steeple, then you need to talk to this guy. He was like the local mega church guy. And I remember sitting down with him in my very first meeting, him saying, you know the things that you're teaching aren't true, and I really would love to see you in our neighborhood for a while, but if you keep teaching them, you're not going to be here. And I remember thinking, oh, this is how it works. So everyone has to kiss the ring. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. Well, maybe I kissed another ring. I'm not trying to super spiritualize this, but for me, what good is it to gain the world but lose your soul? And I guess the ring I'm kissing, I'm not saying like I've kissed the ring of Jesus, all right? I'm just saying maybe my conscience is a higher authority than the mega church pastor. Like when it comes down to it, if I have to decide between I feel led to share this, but let's go with the soul. Yeah. Yeah. And I still see it around here. So many people, we got to get their approval if we're going to make it. And then I eventually decided I don't need your approval. I don't need your approval. We don't need your approval. We don't need your stamp. In fact, I don't know how to tell you this. We're going out to the Jordan. You can have the whole institution. We're done with it. Can I tell you the greatest day of my life is when I wash my hands of the institution? Keep your religion. Keep your convention. And it hurt to say this, but keep your millions of dollars. I'm not going to lie. FYI, there is a cost. Keep your millions of dollars. We're going to the Jordan, and we're going to get a little wild and crazy like John, and we're going to eat some locusts and honey and wear weird clothing and probably do some strange things, but this is our path. And you take yours, but we'll take ours, and this is our path. And it wasn't supposed to work, and yet I still take joy that here we are. We're still 18 years later. Last Sunday was 18 years later, and we're still out here in the Jordan. It's phenomenal. And many of you have chosen to do the same thing. You're a part of this community, and that's what you chose to do. You're like, I'm no longer seeking affirmation and approval from my parents. They don't get my life. They don't understand it. And here's the new thing. I don't need it anymore. And that's when you've gotten it. I don't need it anymore. Because I have had my own experience from the divine going, you are my beloved child, and you I am well pleased. When you experience that, here's what happens. Liberation. Liberation. You no longer long for the approval of others. And when you get liberated, hear me, that's when you get dangerous. That's why Jesus begins, that's his starting point. Where does he go from there? All the way to crucifixion. How did he get there? He walked through that entire thing. And can I tell you what happens in the Gospels over and over again? They keep saying this. Read the Gospels, you'll hear this line. Who are you to say that? Who are you to do that? Show me your credentials. Show me your letter of recommendation. And Jesus always just kept, what do you mean? Go back to the beginning. This is my son, this is my daughter, this is my child in whom I am well pleased. My beloved. That's all the credentials I need. That's all the credentials you need. That's it. You're good. You've got the stamp of the image of God. You don't need some religious person telling you if you're in or out, because God has told you. Yeah. You feel that? All right. Let's just, God, time. Okay. I literally today, I was like, we're getting out at 12. I literally said that, and now we're way over. Okay, so just last question. What about, because I have to say this, otherwise you can't leave us here. What about our community? What are we going to, now just say this, okay? I think just as Christians took this Jewish ritual of the mikvah and viewed it in a different light, I think we can too, okay? Hear me when I say this. Rituals, rites of passage, initiation rites, coming of age markers. I don't have time to go into this. We probably need to give a whole sermon on this. I think they are critical for us in our culture right now. I mean critical. Many of us, because we've walked away, and I'm telling you, we've left some valuable things behind, and we must start reclaiming rites of passage again, okay? So here's what I mean. When I say rites of passage, I mean ceremonies, event-marking, important stages in our lives. Graduations, we still have those. Those are great. Getting your driver's license, great. Anniversaries, great. Getting married, great. Birthdays, great. I'm just saying baptism as a ritual that marks our awareness to our sacred essence is critical. So if you're asking, Cody, are we going to take baptism? I sure hope we do. I sure hope we do. Because here's the thing. I think rites of passage and ceremonial rituals are necessary, and I think they can ground us, and I think when done right, they can be something that we all look back on going, oh, that was amazing. That was amazing. So let me just say this. Baptism didn't make Jesus the Son of God. He was already and always was the Son of God. Baptism doesn't make you a child of God. You are already a child of God, all right? Baptism is no more a requirement to become a child of God than a birthday party is a requirement for aging. You are aging with or without blowing out the candles. Do you understand that? That is true for baptism. It does not make you a son, daughter, child of God. You've always been a son, daughter, child of God. Baptism is not a requirement to become a child of God, but it can be a memorable way to remember that you've always been a child of God. Baptism isn't necessary to get you in the club, but it can be a memorable, ritualistic event to remind us that we've always been in